A little introductions here. So we're now recording, my friends, and welcome everybody to the second of our webinars in our Building a Beloved Community series this winter and spring from Justice, Ohio. And tonight, actually, we have Samuel Prince and myself, and we're going to be talking about renewing Justice Ministries, forming that strong core focus of mission that lends support and strength to our justice ministries. So as we begin here, I'm going to switch to the next slide. And Samuel? You're muted, Sam.
There we go.
Okay.
My apologies about that. The quote we have says, "Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls, as well as a quantitative change in our lives." And this is a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King.
Great. And so we light our chalice. I want to just say a couple things about Justice, Ohio, for those of you that might not be familiar with it. It is our advocacy network, our UU advocacy network here in Ohio, serving our congregations, our UU congregations from Cincinnati to Cleveland, from Toledo down to Bel Air, Ohio. And we're on website, Facebook, Twitter, and email. So there's many ways to get a hold of us. And also wanted to let you know that we are supporting the Poor People's Campaign this spring, and you'll be hearing more about that one. It's a national call for moral revival, and we'll be talking a little bit about what it means to be doing moral revival or culture change in just a minute as part of our justice ministries. But the Poor People's Campaign is a perfect example of the culture change aspect of justice ministry. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention. Okay, and for our, an outline of what we're doing tonight, I'll turn it over to Samuel.
Sure, an outline in which we're doing our agenda. It will go as follows. After I have given you an outline here, what we will have is introductions, then we will go into the justice ministry. What is justice ministry? And then we will go into systems thinking, and a part of justice ministry is looking at our mission and looking at the purpose in which we have, and also having a form of clarity. Who owns the congregation? And then we will be looking at a few examples of mission statements. And of course, we will not have you leave here without having shown you some tools as far as how you could uncover your mission and your purpose. And then a part of the meat of what we will be looking at is as far as how is it that we could link our mission or your mission of your congregation to justice ministry. And then after that, we will have a preview of what upcoming webinars are. And then we will we're hoping the fact that we will get you ready for justice.
All righty. So welcome. As I said, little introductions here. Let's just go around, and I'd like to ask people to give their name and their congregation, or if you're not in the congregation, your organization, and then just name one quick thing that you would like to learn about tonight, or something that you're curious about. No promises that we may not, that we're going to be covering everything, but I'd like to hear what some of the questions might be. And I'm going to call on people And we're going to start with the folk in my corner, and I'm going to start with Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Hedges. I'm with the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Oberlin, and I'm interested really in finding out more about the Justice Ministry in Ohio. This is my first, time participating in one of these.
Okay, great. And I'm going to go to Karen next.
Hi, I'm Karen Groshaw with First Unitarian Church of Cleveland. And I would like to know more about how to really engage the congregation, a congregation that has not, as a congregation, been involved in social justice issues. Individuals have been active, but as a whole body, no.
Good question. All righty, Malik.
Hello, everyone. My name is Malik. I'm a member of the UU West Shore in Cleveland, but I live in Columbus, and I work for the YMCA of Central Ohio. And what I want to learn is just how to build, you referenced it earlier, Joan, critical mass. How do you build and maintain that critical mass?
Okay, thank you. Jeff.
I'm Jeff Whitmer. I'm a member of the Oberlin UU Fellowship, and this is my first time doing anything associated with UUJO, so I just want to find out more about what UUJO does.
You will do that tonight. And then I have a square mark E, helper.
That's Eleanor Helper.
Eleanor, okay.
I'm a member of a Oberlin UU Fellowship, a former member of a large church, the First Church in Columbus. And I guess I'd like to figure out how we can get a bunch of interested people organized to do social justice work. We had a good committee when I first moved here about 14 years ago, but somehow it fell apart, and we're lacking in leadership and figuring out what we want to do and how we're going to do it.
Okay, fair enough.
I want to welcome Brian, who is quite new. Samuel has been around for several years, and it's good to see people from our little congregation.
That's great. Thanks, Eleanor. Deb. Oops, I'll unmute you.
Okay, there you go. I thought I saw the mute thing still. I'm from the UU Church of Akron, and lots of good things that have just been said, which I'm also curious about. So to add to that, how does that, and we have baby steps active social justice happening, and on the congregational level, beyond just individuals. But how does that translate into dollars to do the work? Because a lot of it requires money.
Okay, so let's say resources. Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Good question. Pat, can you unmute yourself and tell us who you are? We'll come back to Pat in a minute. Mariana, you unmute yourself and tell us who you are. I can unmute you. Mariana, can you tell us who you are? I believe that's Mariana from Olmsted. Okay, well, we'll come back. Rick.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So great, because I'm watching on video and couldn't get a speaker there, so I've got the phone on as well.
Sure.
I'm from the First Unitarian Church of Columbus, Ohio, and one of the things that our Social Justice Committee struggles with is how to get more of the congregation involved. In our surveys, when people join the church, that's something they seem to always check, that they are interested in social justice, but we have a hard time in getting any action. We just get people expressing an interest.
Right.
So that's pretty much what we're looking at now, and I'm looking forward to participating in the national UU workshops on the same topic that are coming up that you let us know about. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you, Rick. And Pat or Mariana, were either of you able to use a microphone to tell us who you are?
There's
Go ahead.
There's a chat from Marianne.
Oh, good.
She doesn't have a microphone on her computer. Should she call in? Is her question.
Well, that would be a good idea if you called in, because then you could ask a question, or I can leave the chat box up on my screen, my other screen here, and you can type questions in. So your choice, dear, you can either phone in or you can type questions in the chat, and that'll work, because I'll look at that box. So we aim to please. And this is Mariana from Olmsted, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get started then with the next slide. And that one's going into Justice Ministry and what that is. And Samuel's still muted.
Yes, sometimes I mute myself. I would like to say, though, that before we get started, that I would just like to bring an awareness that when we speak about justice and we speak about ministry, it all sometimes evolves around the things which is fair, the things which are just, things which is impartial. And a couple of hours ago, that there were 17 lives which has been lost.
Yeah.
And sometimes we wonder how just and how fair and how equal is the world in which we live in.
Yeah.
Okay. What is Justice Ministry? There's many times that we have heard of this word justice, and we've heard of social justice, and we've heard of the word ministry. Sometimes I think that there's a conundrum within those two words. You have a word here which is just, which is speaking about impartiality, which is speaking about fairness, which is speaking about equity. And then we have the word ministry. And to me, sometimes when I look at the word ministry, it always evolves around something in which you and I could do. Most of the things we do in our lives is attained, or it entails a ministry of some sort. So, and when we speak of justice, justice is that pathway in which we create so that we could have fairness, or again, so that we could have that equality in which you and I are looking for. That is why that there's a scripture there in which was quoted. It says that speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. Yes, my friends, that is what justice is about. Justice is the work in which we do as Unitarian Universalists. Justice is that hallmark in which we create our mission and the purpose of the existence in which we have. And also, justice kind of wraps itself around three words: action, advocacy, and awareness. And out of that, we create a community in which we need, is to whereby there is kindness, whereby there is equity. And how many times is that we have heard of, I feel as if things is not being fair in this world in which we live, or even within the congregations in which we serve. And as we look at the next slide, it also helps us to see that the various ways as to how we could live out a social justice ministry in which we have. For number one, it means the fact that we have to be community-based, meaning, and that simply means is the fact that we aren't only carrying out a ministry within the four walls in which we have, but that four wall in which we have is also extended outward by means of education, by means of youth development, by means of economics. So when we think of justice and we think of ministry, there is something in which is always that you and I could do. We have a voice. And therefore, as we speak to what is fair, whenever we see an injustice is being occurred, you and I have that ability to speak out. And that is whether it is by means of economics or theological or social or whatever form of public policy in which is being created. You and I could affect not only the congregation in which we're in, but also our outside world.
Okay. Just to kind of sum things up a little bit, when we talk about justice ministry, we're talking about three different approaches or three different elements or three different aspects of it. One, of course, is compassion ministry, which we've all seen. That's feeding the hungry, that's health centers, food banks, the International Hospitality Network for Homelessness Assistance, ESL classes, things like that, sanctuary work. There's systems change ministry, which you, Joe, has been involved in, and that's legislative advocacy and public policy work and the economic reform and death penalty reform and working with the, to advocate for the Dreamers and working with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative and all of these other wonderful organizations. That's systems change ministry. And then there is culture change ministry, the moral revolution, the theological, the moral, philosophical outreach, providing that public prophetic voice in the world. And that's something that you, Joe, is just now really getting into. And it is something that is a core of the Poor People's Campaign and a realization on the part of a growing number of folk that we can't just stick with the systems change ministry without paying attention to those theological roots, because that's where we're getting the power and the energy to create larger movements. Make sense? Okay. Because when we talk about justice ministry, and all three of these aspects, we're talking about so much more than just the usual little committee of people who all come in with their own wonderful project. I mean, great projects, but they all have their own project or their own area of interest, and they come in together maybe once a month as a committee and talk to each other, which is good, but it is not tapping into the real power and the real strength that you get when you work with a whole congregation. So because justice ministry should rise from the congregation's core purpose or mission, and that's what we're going to get into in just a minute, but because it is an expression of that core purpose, justice ministry should be, we want to argue, should be the work of the whole congregation all together in one unified body moving in the same direction.
And also, too, let me just add something to what Joan had just said there. When we look at justice and we look at ministry, that is something in which we all could do. So even though that there is a committee, or maybe there is a team in which your congregation may have, this work involves everyone.
Right. Everyone. Okay. Well, that's what we want to argue for. All right. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about systems thinking, because we are working in a system. Justice Ministry is tied to our system change in our congregations and system change in the larger society. And our congregations, where we work, are emotional systems. So we need to understand a little bit about how they operate when we try to initiate justice ministries. We have to understand a little bit about systems thinking if we're going to initiate some change in our congregations, as well as understand how change operates in the larger world. So that's what I'm just going to go through some very, very basic elements of systems thinking. That's a whole nother workshop in and of itself, but just some basic concepts to get you started. Because this systems thinking is different for us. We usually think linearly, but systems thinking is interdependent, interconnected, intersectional. Things don't exist independently at all, but only in relationship to everything else. So you can't just look at one little part of something, like one little part of the legislature, and think you understand the whole. You have to look at the entire big picture. Same goes for our churches, because nothing is just influenced in one direction. Each part is contributing to the whole. Even if a part doesn't think it's contributing, it really does contribute to that whole. It's all tied in together, because things only function the way they do because of the presence of all the other elements joined together. And my behavior affects Samuel's behavior, and Samuel's behavior affects Deb's behavior when we're together. So it's all of a pattern and system. Change in one part always produces change in another part. Even if you don't think they're connected, they are. And change produces change. Systems like equilibrium, they like the status quo, they like homeostasis, that means maintaining things the same, because it's biologically wired into us that we like to know that the sun's coming up tomorrow and where the breakfast is coming from. So we like stability. Even if we hate the system that we've got, even if we hate what's going on right now, we still like to know what's coming next. So it's, that old saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And that's because we love stability. Interactions between different people are always going to affect the whole system, even if you think you're hiding it. If you're fighting with somebody in your congregation, it's going to leak out no matter what. Even if you guys only fight out in the parking lot, it's going to leak out. Because relationships are not just interesting things to look at. It's really at the root all that there is. Whenever you're dealing with a human construct, a group of human beings together, relationships are forming the core of what that organization or that collection or that church actually is. This is real quick, guys, because wherever two or more are gathered, there is a system. And all human beings live in these systems. These processes occur in all of our relationships. Driving these are innate forces basic to human survival, that love of stability, that love of being together and yet being autonomous and separate. The resulting behaviors are not something that we think out consciously all the time. Sometimes they're automatic, reactive, instinctive. Congregations and communities are emotional systems, so they have their patterns and their habits. And they resist change from familiar, even if it's dysfunctional. This is key in understanding change. We've always done it this way. Even if we hate it, The fact that we've always done it this way means that we want to maintain the stability. And Samuel?
So the question sometimes comes about is how is our congregation homeostasis? How is that equilibrium in which we're trying to create? How is that being balanced out in our congregations? Sometimes we remain the same. Sometimes we've been doing social justice one way. And in some forms and in some ways, the results is not what we expect. What is that famous saying? Is that sometimes we do things the same way without expecting different results? Yeah, sometimes we need to look at the ways how things are affecting us, and the way also that what means to be changed. Example, there as we look in the next slide, which gives us a really nice example as far as how homeostasis work. You know, that the whole church watched with nervous anticipation as the visitors sat where the Martins had sat for 42 years. Things haven't changed. So therefore, how will things change, or how can things change even for that 42 years? So yes, it becomes an emotional system. It becomes an emotional way of thinking. And when we bring it together, change sometimes is not easy. Change sometimes means that we have to remove ourselves from that comfort level in which we have. And that is what that is what justice is about. It's taking us out of that comfort level, because now you, not only within the congregation, but now you have to put yourself outside within your community. So how does that affect you now? How does that make you change, and therefore create that change within your congregation?
Okay. And just kind of a summation there, the emotional system will never change unless people in that system change the way they interact with each other. That's just kind of putting it all in a nutshell. So let's see if we can do a little discussion here, guys. I know, because this is kind of setting some ground level work for what we're going to build on. When you see a change in one part of a system or a relationship changes other parts of a system or relationship, you know you're in a system. Have you seen your congregational system influence your justice ministry? Or have you seen the justice ministry in a congregation ever change or influence the congregation? Have you ever seen it go one way or the other, or both? Any examples? Yeah, Deb, go ahead. I'll unmute you, Deb.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are way more examples than I'm even aware of, but we've upped our justice ministry addressing Black Lives Matter. And a year ago, we put up the Black Lives Matter sign, banners. Mm-hmm. And we've done some relationship building with the community through our Akron Organizing Collaborative and some members of Blue. And I noticed that some of our congregation who just normally aren't aware of, that whole part of the universe, have become more aware. And I also noticed we have a slight increase of people of color coming to our church. So there must be some sort of influence that's happening, but I'm not sure exactly how to, put my finger on it. But
sure, change in one part, doing some changes in the other parts. Anybody else seen an example of either your congregation changing your justice ministry or ministry changing your congregation?
Maybe. It's Karen.
Yeah.
Our prior minister had been there for 17 years, and we now have an interim.
Uh-huh.
And she's shaking things up. There has been more talk recently about social justice and racism from the pulpit. I was engaged in a presentation last week, but that had not happened with the prior minister. So it's very, very preliminary, but we've not heard such strong statements before in a very long time. And so far, I think people are kind of taking it in well. The proof is in the pudding, though.
Sure.
But it is different now, at least in what is said. We'll see about the actions.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else before we move on to beloved community?
This is Rick, and I have I guess I'm struggling here because it's the question about how have you seen your congregational system?
Yeah.
So I'm struggling with, so what is our congregational system? And I don't really, I mean, that seems like a whole separate, thought and discussion to help figure out how I and others would describe our congregational system.
True.
Before I could even say, well, how does that system influence justice ministry? So I'm really not sure how to deal with this.
Okay. No, that's fair.
I just wanted to say that I don't really expect a descriptive answer or anything.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough, because we're not used to looking at our congregations as systems. I mean, the congregation as a whole is an interaction of people together, and it makes a system. And we're not used to looking at things that way. So that's a fair observation, Rick, and thank you for that. And, as we start to look at our congregation, we start to notice a little more how change in one area produces a change in another. Like putting up a Black Lives Matter sign may have changes in other parts of the church we hadn't expected. And those are the kinds of things we start to notice when we see how things are interdependent. Okay, any other notes before we move to beloved community? Because this is one of the core concepts around justice ministry. You could
also,
actually
just let me add something there to what you had just said, Joan, about congregational system. Sometimes a congregation has a way as to how it operates, the way as to how it thinks, the way as to how a vote is being taken, the way as to how the board interacts with the congregation and vice versa. It has a way of showing up in various fashion. So that congregational system would actually show within itself how social justice or justice ministry is being evoked. Right. And therefore, the ways how it's being done could delegate what that system looks like. Now, if it's flourishing, then yeah, you may see change. You may see people coming in. And then if it's not, then it's the ways how you need to look at the ministry. And the ministry sometimes involves not just the justice ministry, but the ministries of your congregation.
Yep, most certainly. Okay. So
the beloved community, we've heard this term so many times. We've seen pictures of it, of people holding hands, people just, they're crying on your shoulders and so forth. But the quote there in what Martin Luther King says is that the end is reconciliation, The end is redemption, and the end is the creation of the beloved community. It is the type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. And that is what the beloved community is more so about, because I think that Dr. Martin Luther King, that when he gives one of his speeches on the mountaintop, I guess that some of us may have heard of that speech, he was not speaking about a physical mountaintop. He was speaking about that awareness about whereby people could enjoy the wealth of the earth. They could enjoy being in good company with each other. They could enjoy kindness. They could enjoy that love which transpires and transforms people, again, from opponents into friends. And it is that type of understanding that can remove the doom and gloom sometimes in which we see now. Granted that we are humans and we are imperfect and things will happen. But it's how do we bring each other back into relationships so that the mission, and I will throw another word out there, covenant, becomes a vital part of our undertaking. So yes, it is that love. It is that love that exudes miracles, and therefore our hearts become affected. And when your heart becomes affected, then our senses may move us into action. That advocacy and awareness. So the question in which I have is that there's a few questions there on the next slide, I think. What is your understanding of beloved community? Let's just start with that. What is your understanding? What do you understand a community or the beloved community to be like or act like?
Sure. There's Steph.
When I think of beloved community, I think of working together for the greater good of people that you may or may not know. You may or may not ever know the impact you have because of our interdependency with each other. You do it whether or not you know those people, see them, or see the impact. It's because it's just part of being it's part of our humanity. I'm not sure that's a good way of saying it, but that's what I got.
That works. Humanity. What else?
I would say it's living out the reality that all human beings are created equal members of one human family.
Okay. So therefore, the question then comes about, how is this concept related to Justice Ministry? How is it that the concept of beloved community are related to Justice Ministry? Or is there a relationship?
Well, for me, I think that when you're working to create justice within your community, if it's not just, it can't be a beloved community. Everybody has to be able to have what they need or access to whatever it is that is unjust, fixed, in order for it to be a beloved community. I mean, or at least the efforts being made to right wrongs. so that the community can be together. So, and you right those wrongs through a justice ministry, whether or not you actually personally see how when you do this one thing, it impacts someone over here. That doesn't matter. It's not about getting that credit for it. It's about making it happen because it has to happen.
Yeah.
Because that's human decency depends on it. It's, that's just how it needs to be.
Sure.
Yeah, and this is Jeff. For me, there's an element of, I might call it selfishness, that I'm going to work to promote justice, not because that'll make me feel good about your life getting better, but because your life affects my life. And so I need to make your life better so my life is better because you're part of my community.
For me, there's a related piece to what you just said, that it's only partly about making someone else's life better, doing good in the community, but it's about truly living your values. That it comes from, I liked your comment about selfishness. I do it for my own benefit more than helping somebody else, because I'm integrating what I value with my actions, and it's all the better when there's a community spirit behind that and actively a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a sermon, and there is a sermon by Martin Luther King whereby the question was asked, where do we go from here? And in that sermon, Martin Luther King spoke about that very same spirit. And in order to always do justice work or justice ministry, it involves a certain spirit. And it's that spirit of love, that spirit which constitutes us to move towards, is what was said, towards the help of my neighbor. And once that spirit or that spiritual work is carried out, yes, we could see now that there is a relationship in which we have in between our community and being just and being loving at the very same time. So it's all connected. Whether it's LGBT or whether we're speaking of environmental or all those various ways of intersectionality occurs to create what justice ministry looks like.
Yeah. And if I could follow up, Karen, about values. Richard Gilbert, Dick Gilbert, a UU minister and ethicist, said that we have to be clear that some values are not optional. They're not optional. They have to be lived. And if we refuse to act on those, fail to live out those values, then we are abdicating our essential role as spiritual and moral beings.
Yes, yes.
So really, really core there. Alrighty, shall we move on? Because next, we're going to really delve into some of this mission question. In our congregations, we talk about mission statements and goals and that. But really, what is it at the core of our congregation, the core purpose of the congregation, that we then live out, as Dick Gilbert said, in those values that we have to, that are not optional for us. So when we talk about purpose or mission in a congregation, Dr. Pete Steinke said that if a sailor has no destination, no clear idea of where to go, the sailboat meanders around and doesn't go anywhere. He says a sailor needs a destination in order to adjust the sails and move with the wind. He says communities, churches are no different. Without a destination, without knowing a clear purpose and a mission, the responses are random, habitual, sometimes meaningless. But congregations with a vision, with a clear idea of why they're doing what they do, they set their sails. And the leaders in the congregations are the sailors. So that's his analogy. And I want to show you a really short little video about looking at our core purpose, because we're going to be talking about that. And this is from the movie The Guardians. How many of you saw that one? Okay.
I don't know if I did.
Okay, well, let me show you this, and we'll see what we mean by the core or the essence. Jack Frost is meeting Santa Claus.
Fruitcake? No, thanks. Now we get down to tax of breath. Tax? Who are you, Jack Frost? What is your center? My center? If Man and Moon chose you to be a guardian, you must have something very special inside. Here, this is how you see me, no? Very big, intimidating. But if you get to know me a little, well, go on.
You are downright jolly?
But not just jolly. I am also mysterious and fearless and caring. And at my center,
there's a tiny wooden baby.
look closer. What do you see?
You have big eyes.
Yes! Big eyes, very big, because they are full of wonder. That is my center. It is what I was born with. Eyes that have always seen the wonder in everything. Eyes that see lights in the trees and magic in the air. This wonder is what I put into the world. And what I protect in children. It is what makes me a guardian. It is my center. What is yours?
I don't know.
Right.
I love that little,
Mm-hmm.
because it does say so much about who we are. Who are our congregations? What is our center, that magical center that makes our congregations powerful? And that's what we're going to be talking about now. So I'm going to turn it over to Samuel to talk about purpose and mission, not mission statements, but purpose and mission. Oh, you're muted again. Here we go.
Sorry. Yep. So as we have looked at Justice Ministry and we have looked at our beloved community, we are now entering into a phase of who we are. Why is it that your congregation exists? Why does your congregation exist? What is that calling that you're there on a Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon? What is it that calls you there? As what that video there says, it speaks about what is at your center, what is at your core. And it is that core as to whereby your mission becomes a vital part as to who you are. That mission that draws people in, and therefore we hope that they do not leave. So what is it? As we look as we look at the next slide there, it speaks both to the fact that it speaks of the health, the growth, the influence, the stewardship, the resiliency in face of change or crisis, But then it says, it is at the core of the congregation's justice work. And it is that mission that drives the whole entire congregational system there, Rick, and others, to really show the fact as to how the congregational functions. So as we look at what your mission does, right? You create your mission. Your mission should in some way, some form, for visitors, it should have, and those who wants to be a member, but it will also act as an inspiration to those who are there. And most of all, it shapes your justice ministry. It gives it a name, it gives it a face. It creates that mold in which it needs so that it could function, and function in a way that inspires people. So as we look at the next slide there,
okay.
The question is asked, who owns the congregation? And this is sometimes one of these big questions that is always asked. Who owns your congregation? Is it the minister? Is it the board? Is it the president of the board? And all of that, the answer is no. The owner of your congregation is your mission and the way as to how the congregation lives up to that mission in which it has. And that degree as to the way as to how it lives up to that mission becomes the owner as far as the way as to how your congregation is perceived, and the way as far as how it attracts others to come in, creating that stakeholders and those as to who can become involved within the congregational system and its actions in which it has.
Okay. We've got a little video that kind of gets into this, I think, just a little bit more directly. Because when we're talking about the core purpose of a congregation, that magical center that gives the energy to everything and provides the energy for justice ministry, Dan Hotchkiss, who is a UU minister himself, he really does a good job of saying the relationship of that mission to the congregation. And this is a 4-minute clip. So let me start that one for you, and then we'll talk about it.
So what's governance and what's ministry? Well, I like to think of them as two kinds of power that it makes sense for a congregation to delegate separately. Governance is the basic job of the board, which is to think about the mission of the congregation constantly, to ask the question of how are we going to choose to carry out that mission, who are we going to empower to take action in behalf of the congregation, and how are we going to hold those that we give power to accountable. In some ways, the work of governance in a congregation is like the job of governance or the work of the board of a business corporation. But there's some important differences, mainly having to do with a word that often comes up when we talk about boards, which is the word fiduciary. A fiduciary is a person or a group that have a duty to act in the interest of another, even if that is in conflict with their own interest. So, for example, Oftentimes, we think of a fiduciary as someone who holds money in behalf of a minor child, for example. A banking trust department will do that sometimes. And their duty is to act in the interest of that child, even if that's in conflict with the interest of the fiduciary or the bank itself. The job of a business corporation board is to act as a fiduciary for the stockholders. The stockholders are the owners of the company. They're entitled to benefit from its work. And the job of the board members is to act as the stockholders would benefit, even if the individual board members might have a conflicting interest. For example, a board member who also is an owner of a company that supplies to the company needs to set that role aside, that conflicting interest, may need to recuse himself or herself from a board meeting. That's being a fiduciary. And you're always a fiduciary for someone. In the case of a business corporation, you're being a fiduciary for the stockholders who want to make money out of the business. If I went to a congregation and asked, who is the board the fiduciary for, I might get a number of different answers. Some people might say, oh, that it's the denomination. Some people might say it's God. Some people might say it's the membership. In fact, most of the members in most kinds of American congregations and Canadian congregations would say the members are the group for whom the board is the fiduciary. I actually disagree with that. And here's why. You can't divide up the assets of a church and write everybody a check. A business can do that because the stockholders of a business are the owners, but the members of a congregation are not the owners. In fact, I think that when members at a congregational meeting vote, they vote just as the board members do as fiduciaries. But fiduciaries for what? For whom? Who's the owner of a congregation? The best answer I know is that the owner of a congregation is the mission. It's the mission that's entitled to benefit from the congregation's work. It's the mission that should be the criterion for determining the fiduciary duty, not just of board members, but of congregants when they vote. So at a congregational meeting, if any individual congregant has a choice between what he or she individually prefers and what would best serve the mission of the congregation, that congregant's duty is to vote the mission. So that's the work of governance, is
Okay, we're going
to
move
hold
on.
the.
But what did you think about that? The idea that the mission is the owner of the congregation. And this is why Hotchkiss says that it takes active buy-in from a whole congregation to achieve that mission. And the question is, what does that mean then for Justice Ministry? So what do you think of that idea? That kind of goes counter to some of our congregational polity ideas, or common congregational polity ideas.
I find that, this is Rick, I find that impossibly complex, since a fiduciary would actually be a person that you could ask a question of or hold accountable to. But you can't really do that with a mission, which is a concept. It's not a person. It's not no one that you can pin down and say, who's your responsibility to, and how are you going to do that? So I find it totally, I should say baffling, but doesn't make a bit of sense. Thank you.
Oh, well, maybe from what I was hearing, the mission is not the fiduciary. The congregants and the board are the fiduciaries, and their accountability is to the mission. So maybe that helps a little bit. But that's a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I had not thought of it that way, but I think it makes a lot of sense. totally need to revise your thinking about what you're about and how you relate to each other and what you choose to do.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very mission-based. I like it.
Other thoughts? Yeah, Deb. Whoops, I can unmute you there.
I think I like the idea actually a lot, and I think if a congregation embraces that, the individual has to come out of their own little box of what they think is right or wrong, or to do or not do, or those little people that are buzzing around in the congregation saying, "Oh, well, they shouldn't," oh, blah, 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 that kind of thing. It's like that doesn't count. That kind of stuff. You don't do that, because that doesn't serve the mission. It's not about you as an individual. It's about this purpose that you've set up and you all agreed to.
The larger
I know,
mission.
I like it.
Yeah. Can you see the ties to Justice Ministry here, if you were to really take that to heart?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other thoughts on that before I move on?
Yeah, let me add too is the fact that there are times when we look at mission, and sometimes when we look at the way as to the reason why we come to a place of worship, it becomes tangible. All right, it becomes that thing is to whereby we physically have to have as an owner. And when you look at a mission is this invisible thing which is there. It's not, but it still has the bond. It still has that strength of holding people as one, but not just holding them as one, but also holding each individual accountable. So if there is a step out of line with that person or individual, then your mission can be that asset or can be that force that brings you back into relationships also. So sometimes, yes, we have our eyes, it usually attaches to a visible, tangible thing, whereby our mission is what holds us, because that is what we agreed on as a congregation. That becomes our core. If we don't know our mission, then sometimes it is reflective in what is our core.
Yeah, I mean, there's essentially, if we don't know the purpose, if we don't know our core in the congregation, and we haven't tapped into that energy, then how can we possibly do effective justice ministry? Instead, it devolves into little pet projects as opposed to being an expression of our core purpose as a group and a congregation. So that's kind of the benefit of being clear then about our purpose and about our mission is huge. Now, we humans have that pervasive need for connections, for relationship. We know that, and purpose. And the congregation is an expression of that. We need to know why we have come together. What is our being? What's that core purpose? We need to know that before we feel like we want to belong and can participate in that group. We want to know why it exists. Same with a congregation. So being clearer, really clear about our purpose and mission enables us to breathe vitality and renewal and energy into all of the aspects of the congregation and our programming and our educational life together, including our justice ministry. So that's why we really lay such heavy emphasis on knowing that purpose or mission. Now, for a congregation that doesn't have a clear purpose or mission, life can be a little bit confusing and a bit vague, like this cartoon where it says, our services are a bit dull and not many people show up. And We don't have a website, as we don't really know how to make one, and there's not anybody available to speak to you at the moment, as we're all quite busy, what with one thing and another. But P.S., we need some money for the roof. So, you know, how many congregations have we seen who could put a sign out like that? Very vague. They don't know their core purpose. You know, like that video with the Santa Claus said, they don't know who they are really inside. And without that, you can't tap into the energy to organize. So when we know our purpose, when we know our mission, we can chart real goals. We can make effective choices. We can increase volunteer participation because people want to join in when they know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Some research lately says that the top reason people give money and time and talent to a group is because they believe in and support that mission or purpose. So belief in that, knowledge of that, clarity of that purpose is key, not only to giving money, but to doing justice ministry and having people join in that. And here's another little cartoon. It's from our church. We've been called up for active duty. People want to know the purpose before they're going to give their time, before they're going to join in onto the justice ministry program. They want to know why. So some other summation here. Benefits of being clear. New energy for the congregation's soul, and it can be profoundly threatening if you guys do dig into what your core purpose is and you do articulate that, because that may come as a surprise to some people who thought it was that vague church like the cartoon. And that vague church like the cartoon was something they were familiar with. They were, you know, expecting that. You know, the homeostasis says they want to stay with what they know rather than try something new. But if you do dig in and you do find core purpose, then you may have some folk that don't like it. And that's a reality we have to live with. So just to let you know that if you use the tools we're going to show you and you dig into core purpose and that results in some active justice ministry, there may be some folk that don't agree with that core purpose. Okay. Just a word about vision. Sometimes we confuse mission with vision, but vision is really how a congregation lives out its purpose in the coming years. You have a vision for justice ministry. And when we are very, very clear about our purpose, we see that there's a number of ways of living out that vision. And you have to discern, though, the right way to do that. That's why God invented planning and mission statements to help us articulate what our purpose is and our vision for the future. Samuel?
So this is why what we are trying to do here is not to always to paint a rosy picture, because there are times that when tension will arise, there will be a need for us to take much more of a closer look at what our mission is. And there's one thing with our mission. Once you have that mission in place and you understand what that mission is, it helps you to bring about a healthy congregation. It helps you to create and foster the relationships in which you need, so now that you could be living out the community in which you want and which you need to have. It acts as that motivational tool towards, this is the reason why I attend church. This is the reason why I am here. So as we look at mission and the statements in which we have, a question which I asked before is the fact of, what is your mission, or how does your mission coincide with your whole entire purpose? And sometimes, how long should your mission statement be? It says that your mission, it should articulate your response as far as the core as to who you are. Statements only articulate what we bring in, no longer than one sentence, 9 words, 3 words. Example, our mission is to serve, connect, and grow. How simple is that? It can be understood by a 12-year-old or maybe a 5-year-old. You know that that show in which they had a couple of months ago or so, how smart is a 3-year-old or something like that. Yeah, our mission should be understood by a child, and it can be recited by memory. So why don't we take a couple of examples and look at a couple of examples of what mission statements are and the ways how it's conceived. Let's look at the Church of Akron. There it says that there is 3 words in which is in bold. It says leading, acting, and speaking. But then it says we are a sanctuary of love and welcome for all, dedicated to lifelong intellectual and spiritual exploration and committed to leading, acting, and speaking for social justice and stewardship of earth. When I look at this, what I see is leading, acting, speaking. And yet that appeals to me because it includes the ways how we lead, how we act, and how we speak. When we look at also at the First Church of Indiana, they have a mission statement there that say that we are committed to inspire and nourish, to apply and promote. So again, it's these words in which is being emphasized: inspire, nourish, apply, and promote. We inspire and nourish the personal spiritual journey, apply the values and principles of Unitarian Universalism in our living, and promote compassionate and responsible thought and action in the world. I think that word action should also be emphasized here too, but it's okay. And when we look at the mission statement of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, it's right out there. This is what their mission is: learn, value, serve. Learning to know each other and ourselves, of valuing and embracing the richness of our diversity, serving others and confronting injustice to do more than each can do alone. Learning, valuing, serving.
If I could make just a small comment on these short, lovely little mission statements, you can see some of their core here, learn, value, serve, these core values. And you can see how they highlight in all of these, they come to a conclusion that they have to do justice ministry. Mm-hmm. All of these are leading to a justice ministry and engagement with the world.
Yeah.
From a spiritual core.
Yeah. There is a means of action. There's a means of the verb, the action, in which you're having there to show that you're not just existing within the 4 walls in which you have, but also you're taking what you're learning inside and taking it outside. So how does purpose and mission, a vision, how does purpose, mission relate to justice ministry? What do you think? How does purpose and mission relate to justice ministry?
Yeah. I think Joan, you just really said it actually, that all of those mission statements led to the fact that it had to be taken outside into the world and into justice work. And so I think that's how it connects. Your mission takes you outside your four walls. And when you do that, you very often are basically doing justice ministry, because you're going outside to do something, to serve, to help with whether it's environmental or economic or racial or whatever it is. That's why you're going out there. So
I think it makes a distinction between your reason for being and a program. Social justice is not a thing, an action you do. So I guess I'm a little different from Deb at the moment. It's your soul.
I like that. I like that. It's your soul. So it's more than charity then, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's your soul. It's who we are. It's, again, is what I like to say. It's the hallmark of Unitarian Universalism. I mean, that is who we are. And we're just being reminded here now as to how we could do it more. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? How does purpose and mission relate to justice ministry? Okay. Well, as we look at the quote there by W. Clement Stone, and to me, this speaks fire. When you discover your mission, you feel its demand. It will fill you with enthusiasm and a burning desire to get to work on it. Yeah.
Would that be true in all congregations?
Yes. So, yes, Joan, you could continue there on 53.
Oh, alrighty. Yeah, we're running a little short on time, so I'll try to condense things kind of quickly here. Why don't we look at our purpose more often? It's scary because we assume that it's right, it's enshrined in the bylaws, it seems unchangeable, and it threatens, to change the current ways we do things. We love homeostasis, right? But that's why we very rarely ever look at our mission or purpose. I mean, the core heart of who we are as a congregation. And we all know that the mission statement does not create a purpose. It only reflects what we bring to it. So our job is to first know who we are as people and what our purpose is. And we need shared, intentional, solid, concrete, and real answers to these questions if we are going to be effective in the world, if we're going to have the energy and the focus to be effective. So that's why we got to get clear. We already saw the benefits of being clear. But clarity only comes through persistent and ongoing dialogue. So this is how you get down to that core purpose in the middle of that Russian doll that Santa Claus was showing us in the video. You have to do it with this dialogue. And in the dialogue, you also will find out the various steps that you need to take in order to give life and form to that vision of how you're going to live your mission out. I was going to say, sometimes we rely on the minister or the religious educator in order to provide these things. They cannot do that. Religious professionals can only give support, some insight, and maybe some ideas on how to run a small group dialogue, right? But they can't give a congregation its mission, and they can't provide that sense of purpose that is at the core. That comes from us as a collective. This dialogue is not easy to get to the core purpose, but the dialogue is very richly rewarding and needed in order for us to do our work in the world effectively. And what we want to do is give you some essential tools to help us uncover that core purpose And we're going to I'm going to go through some questions that you can use in your congregations, that leaders can use to initiate that dialogue that uncovers purpose. And later on, I can share these with you. If you want that, you can email me and I can share the questions with you. Because these questions are intended to bring that inductive aspect of the process into the open, to uncover what's in the heart, in the middle of the Russian dolls. And it's partly a matter of hearing, from individual congregants as they talk with one another, but it's also discerning the movements of the Spirit that are operating in our hearts as a whole. A mission has deep roots in that congregation's present, and it shapes its future as well. The tools that I'm going to outline for you quickly are very, very good for use in small group work or sermon series. We can make excellent sermon series and topics, and education classes for adults and youth and children. And by combining all this and some other creative ways, we can get at that core purpose. And we can even talk a little bit at the end here about how to do small group work. But Samuel, I'm going to ask you to read through the questions, and then I'll talk about small group work.
Sure. And these are questions, friends, as to whereby, again, you could take it up with wherever you are. What do I believe is the fundamental purpose of religion, and am I willing to join with that purpose in our congregation? What makes my faith liberal, and how have we demonstrated this religious liberalism? When have we personally participated in a congregational effort that have a positive effect on the surrounding community? How has my faith transformed me, us, and how can it transform the world? In what ways are we working to build beloved community? Where do people of color find that comfort and solidarity in congregations that are predominantly white? Is our faith tradition a spiritual home for people of color? What currently makes sharing our religious values difficult throughout society, and how can we uncover the difficulty? Does your congregation have a calling, a job to do, or a way to be engaged in the world? Does it understand that it's calling? Like most callings, it may not immediately apparent, be immediately apparent, and that together the members may have to work at discovering it. Is my congregation willing to risk an unknown future in order to fulfill its role in the world? Powerful questions.
Oh, yeah. Those are a lot of questions. You wouldn't want to hit your congregation with all of those, okay? But I have worked with congregations who've taken some of these, and they have done a lot of small group work as well as sermon series and education work. And leaders have been using one or two of these questions at a time. In small groups, they will ask people to write down their responses to the question, because written responses always are a little more thoughtful than just offhand oral ones where, we tend to agree with what the other person said before us most of the time. But by asking questions of this kind, it's possible to generate a real understanding of the strengths of the congregation, its core, what's at its very center and core, as well as some areas for growth and further development. In leading the discussion of these kind of questions, we note those strengths that we can build on. We tend to really come out with positive responses, as opposed to just sitting and griping about things that aren't going the way we thought they would. So these are the kind of questions that elicit much deeper thought about who and what we are as a congregation. And that's the idea, because from that, we would be then able to better discern what our core purpose is. So the big question then, what do you think would happen if you introduce some of these questions into your congregation? As small group work, sermon work, adult education? And what do you think might happen? And what any ideas about mission change? What you think? What would, if you started asking questions like that, what would happen?
I don't know.
Don't know. How do you think people would react?
I think we would get into debates rather than dialogue.
Ah,
Mm.
okay. You'd have to structure it very carefully then. Yeah.
This is Rick. I think it would be very threatening to the people that worked on developing any of our mission statements, because of the amount of time and investment that the people had in that, and some of these questions would threaten they did or didn't do.
You want to avoid blaming anybody for something that they did in the past like that. Yeah, they did the best they could with what they had too. And the idea may not even change your mission statement at all, but it could help you understand what's at the, what's behind it and the energy that's behind your thoughts about your purpose as a congregation. Do you think anything would change if you talked about these?
It'd be hard to figure out a good way to bring them up, because I don't think we don't seem to deal with this in between when we decide to revisit our mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have to be time to track these questions to the right people at the right time.
Yep, take some planning, very careful planning. Any other thoughts on these, Samuel? Any thoughts?
Questions. I mean, questions are always challenging, and asking questions with love, asking questions with concern, asking questions with joy helps us to get the answers in which we need, but also it helps us as Unitarian Universalists. I mean, this is who we are. We ask questions because we all on that same path of spiritual growth.
True. Let me kind of wrap up here and give you a couple little getting a little tired here, but a few more elements that might help you, and things that offers resources. We do have 3 more webinars coming up really soon that are providing resources for strengthening your justice ministry in your congregation. When you know where your energy and your core is, you can do a lot. But we're going to be talking about working with teens and children, some really practical applications of that energy, some organizing skills, that's working with volunteers, grassroots lobbying. We talk a lot about that systems change ministry and the legislative and the advocacy work. But do we really know how the state legislature really works? You got to know what you're dealing with before you can change it. So those are coming up in March and April, and then April 21st as well. So those are on the UJO website too. And then we have a program that we offer our congregations right now that want to really energize and revitalize their justice ministry. And we start with some of those core questions we just talked about. And we start by looking at what's at the center of the congregation. And there's a couple of congregations already working with this process, and we offer coaching and workshops to go along with this. But the process itself is called Ready for Justice, trying to get ourselves ready to go out and engage the world. And we have small select teams in the congregation of people who really have a feeling for the congregation as a whole. We do some assessment work of what's gone on in the past in the congregation, what has worked, what's been really positive. We look at what our strengths, our growing edges, our weaknesses, and our opportunities are. We look at our sense of purpose and values for justice ministry. Where do we want to make a difference? How does this fit in with the congregation's mission? Once again, we come back to that point. What's our spiritual foundation? We look at all the resources we have, very practical, local resources, collaborative resources, other organizations, other UU groups and congregations. We then do some leader training to help the leadership in the congregation get the tools they personally need to lead this work. Maybe it's even, things like public speaking, knowledge of what the lobbying process is, the theological depth, perhaps, of something that they need. Then we help them go through some planning work, and then organizing with materials, volunteers, etc. And then implementation that engages the entire congregation in a strong ministry. And this process takes about 18 months, a year to 18 months, depending on the congregation and its timing. We have one right now that wants to do it in 9, so we're going to work with them on that. But this is going to be available to the congregations in Ohio, and you'd be working with 2 of the coaches from our UJO board and myself as we work through these stages of revitalizing and renewing your congregational justice ministry. Any questions on that? It's pretty intensive, but the 2 congregations already engaged. One of them has already done the first 3 stages, and they're finding it very valuable. So, and then I have a couple of helpful books here for you: Governance and Ministry with Dan Hotchkiss, and Congregational Leadership in Anxious Times with Peter Steinke. So those are really good ones to have on hand. Any other final thoughts or questions before we wrap up?
Joan, I wondered if it would be possible to have these slides on sent to us either by mail or email. I think it would help a lot of us, or me certainly, remember what all we've discussed and what some of the ideas are.
We're going to take this recording and put it on our Facebook page. And if you email me, I will certainly send you a copy of the slides, okay?
Okay, that would be very nice. Thank you.
Happy to do that. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. Then I'm going to let Samuel wrap up for us.
As we extinguish our chalice, we would extinguish our chalice with these words by Margaret Whitley. A people, we are the solution to the problems that confronts us. Not technology, though it can help, but we are the solution. We, as generous, open-hearted people who want to use our creativity and caring on behalf of our human beings and all life.
All righty. Well, thank you all. And I hope to see you next month when we're talking about teens and youth and justice ministry.
Thank
you.
Thank you all.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's great.